Hello and welcome to the VAA's HiveMeet. I'm Andrew Wooten and we're streaming live to YouTube. This is our first event. It was delayed by the cyclone, but I'm delighted to say that we've got 120 people registered for the event. So that's a tribute to the interest in our guest speaker, more about him in a moment. And it's also, I hope, the sign that we've come up with a very good way of communicating with Victoria's beekeepers. Now we're live, and that means that we can be interactive, and so you'll find that there's a chat box on the right of your screen, and so we'd like you to use that and type in questions and comments. And we'll monitor those and we'll bring them into the chat session at the end. We're using software that creates a virtual studio, so I'm here in Melbourne, and our guest presenter is in New South Wales. And we've also got a co-host who's in Woodend. Sorry, I slipped for a moment. And I'm going to bring him in now. So let's say hello to Tino. Hello, Tino.
Hello, Andrew.
And Tino's going to say a word from our sponsors.
We are very grateful to BQual to be our sponsor for the inaugural series of HiveMeet. For those of you who don't know, BQual was established by ABIC, the Australian Honeybee Industry Council, as an independently developed and audited food safety program. BQual's goal is to ensure that 90% of honey produced in Australia goes through a quality assurance process for both domestic and export markets. And they have over 300 members across the country. Now I'm going to turn it back to Andrew, who will introduce our guest for tonight.
Okay, our inaugural guest is Dave Fairhall from New South Wales DPI. He's the Extension and Engagement Coordinator, and Dave has been keeping bees since he was a teenager. And he's been involved with the New South Wales DPI for the whole of the Varroa response. So that's well over 2.5 years now. Dave's got very many fascinating stories to tell about being on the front line with Varroa. So we're looking forward to hearing that. At the end of his presentation, we're going to have some questions and answers. So make sure you use the chat and put them forward, and we'll talk about them at the end. Thanks, Dave. Off you.
All right, thanks, Andrew. So this presentation has been put together through a lot of interaction, as a result of a lot of interaction of the New South Wales videos with beekeepers. And we've gathered information about what the beekeepers are telling us they're seeing in the field in New South Wales while trying to monitor for and manage Varroa, and also what our videos have seen themselves. So this is a presentation we've started to roll out, which is the learning so far from New South Wales. I'm going to run through these slides quite quickly because we've only got around about 20 minutes. And if any questions, we can come back and address any of this at the end. I'd want to leave enough time to go through some case studies and talk about those. So just to put this presentation in context, we need to be aware that this is all anecdotal information. There's no hard science in yet about managing Varroa in Australia's climate and Australia's conditions, but it's the best we've got so far. And the videos in New South Wales have engaged with around 4,800 individual beekeepers to date. So we have a lot of interaction with beekeepers who are trying to get through this, initial period with Varroa. I guess one of the other things we need to mention is that we often get called to the worst cases, and we've got to be careful that we're not biased to think, the whole sky's falling in. It's all doom and gloom, because beekeepers in New South Wales, there's many of them who are successfully surviving and managing Varroa, and we'll talk a bit about that at the end. Just very, very quickly, this is just a snapshot of where New South Wales sits at the moment. You can see almost all the coast is under reinfestation, entered the reinfestation phase, except for the very north and the very bottom of the coast, southern end of the coast. And then we've got a lot of little areas that have popped up inland, and they're at various stages of reinfestation. We've even got some places on the coast where the reinfestation started to ease up a little bit. Just really quickly, some of the things that we found in the field with many interactions is that alcohol wash and soapy water wash seem to be the gold standard in monitoring methods. We've done some in-field testing with CO2 and with sugar shake, and they're not up to the task. They're just not doing the job. Sugar shake, for example, we believe that's got a lot to do with the fact that we've got high humidity. The bees are quite often on a honey flow, and they regurgitate their, what's in their honey stomach, and we end up with the the sugar sticking to the side of the container and all over the bees, and we're not getting very good results. One of our videos, Emily Nordyke, said sugar shake is just not doing the job. One of our videos, Cam Taylor Brown, did a little bit of work in the field, checking sugar shaking and CO2 method, and similar results between the two. And I've got some numbers there with the sugar shake. We actually got 4 mites. He then washed those same bees with metho and got 15 mites. And I highlight those numbers because those results, very, very different result in terms of how you would then go and manage Varroa in that hive or your loader hives, considering that at the time this was done, the threshold was 9 mites per 300 bees. So obviously 4 means don't treat, but 19 means you definitely do need to treat. So our messaging in New South Wales is stick with alcohol wash or soapy water wash. We also found that drone uncapping has been very, very useful at the detection of low-level infestations at the early stage. We think as a team of EDOs that we've actually found it more frequently by doing drone uncapping when there's only a very, very limited number of mites in a hive, as opposed to alcohol washing. So we're not saying don't do alcohol washing or soapy water washing. What we're saying is do drone uncapping as well. And we encourage beekeepers in New South Wales to carry a drone uncapping fork around. And whenever you lift a frame of brood out and it's got drone brood on it, then uncap the drone brood and have a look. But obviously, the first time you find 1 mite in that load, you may as well put your fork back in the ute, because from that point on, you need to know mite load. And to get mite load, you've got to do one of the monitoring methods, which tells you number of mites per 300 bees. Some observations about feral hive die-out. Again, this is all just what we hear from the beekeepers, and it's actually quite limited amount of information. But basically, we're sort of hearing from like Mark Page, who was a New South Wales BBO, now works for Tocal Training, when mites first appeared in the hives in the Nabiac area where he lives. 5 months later, he monitored a number of feral colonies and they were dead in about 5 months. So that's not saying it turns up and 5 months later it's dead, because they would have been in the area before they were picked up in his hives. But it's certainly saying that they're not lingering on they're not still there is the point. Same with the group of Kempsey commercial beekeepers. When the reinfestation really started to ramp up around their locations, they reckon about 9 months later it started to ease up. And in terms of the percentage of die-out, the only information we really have at this stage is that Western Sydney Uni did a feral colony survey around the university. They were monitoring 30 colonies, and as of now, there's 1 left. So, and we as VDOs have yet to be shown a feral colony or find a managed colony in a load that's been highly affected by Varroa that's still surviving. So it seems to be quite quick, and it seems to be almost all the colonies are dying out. The reinfestation rates in New South Wales, so obviously you get mites in an area and then it slowly builds up and you get to treatment threshold, but all the ferals and unmanaged colonies around you continue to build mite loads. And the reinfestation rates are quite intense. And I know intense is, hard to quantify, but we're seeing cases where we've had colonies that have been lost in the period of 2 to 3 months once reinfestation really starts to ramp up. What we see is we see different things when colonies are lost. We see absconding hives, we see lots of dead bees which have the appearance of poisoning, and we see slime outs. Lots and lots of slime outs reported, which we believe are the result of high mite loads affecting the colony and the beetles just taking advantage of the situation. The other thing we found is that strong colonies can look really, really healthy. In the absence of deforming virus, there's no visual indication that you might have a mite load unless you do monitoring. And so they can look really healthy, and then in a matter of weeks, they can decline very, very suddenly. So that's another observation that we've seen from the field. Really, really quickly, We've had quite a few reports and seen cases where the non-synthetic treatments have caused acute harm to the bees, and they're obviously also the more risky of the treatments in terms of potential risks to the beekeepers themselves. So while the non-synthetics, have that immediate harm, the synthetics themselves seem to be less risky from that, acute effect. But there's studied and probably unknown sublethal impacts of the synthetic treatments as well. We're hearing about variability in the efficacy of the non-synthetic treatments as well, which could be climate related. It could be the mite load. We don't really know, but what we do know is that the non-synthetics don't appear to be as reliable as the synthetics. One of the problems that beekeepers are finding, and every beekeeper in Australia is going to find this, is that we're in a country where we have sort of near constant honey flows in a lot of areas, and that presents a real challenge in being able to treat with treatments that say you can't treat with Supers-On. So some of the beekeepers are looking at, and I know of at least one that's adopted treatment boxes where they, rather than try and squash a colony down to a single, which is near on impossible, if they've got an opportunity during a lighter honey flow, they can squash their colonies down to a double, still have the queen excluder in, but that treatment box which is left on, then for all intents and purposes, it then needs to be considered to be a second brood box in terms of its exposure to chemical. So nothing can be taken out of that box and used for honey consumption, human consumption. But those frames can certainly be used to feed bees. You can leave that as your winter food source box when you drop them back down to a double. You can use it for demeries, splits. So there's potential for that to be one way for some, it's certainly one way that some of the commercial beekeepers are looking at trying to get around this bit of an issue about not being able to treat with Supers-On. There is some permit wording that's going up for review later this year, and that's something the APVMAs are looking at. Just some quotes that we've used quite frequently, and I've got that little image, which I'm sure everybody's seen, the bottom left-hand side of that slide, which basically says that after you've hit peak population in your bees, which is the blue line, and then the bee population starts to decline, untreated, your mite load continues to rise. And so that, autumn period leading into winter is really, really critical, excuse me, in terms of getting on top of your mite load so that you've got good, strong colonies and bees going through winter. So Slavi Nenov, one of our videos, he quotes, one mite killed in autumn equals 1,000 mites prevented in spring. We don't know what the number is. It's probably not 1,000, but the point is, if you get on top of your treatment in autumn and keep your mite loads down, you prevent a problem in spring. The quote at the top there, one mite in a wash is hundreds in a hive. It's sometimes, we do washes and we find 2 or 3 mites in a wash, and you look at it and it sort of seems quite insignificant. But when you do the numbers, that can be many, many hundreds of mites in a hive. So I guess our monitoring method, we need to acknowledge that while it looks, to be quite a small number of mites, it actually represents quite a lot of mites in the hive. And the last thing is, we know that when we go through the build-up phase and we're going to get a lot of reinfestation from feral colonies, and a lot of them are going to die out, every time we throw a swarm out into the environment, that's likely to establish as a feral colony, which will then come back to reinfest our hives as it dies out from Varroa later on. So swarm control is definitely Varroa control. Just going to spend a fair bit of time on this slide and talk about 6 case studies. And I'll go through them quickly, so ask questions at the end. But the first one we call the Cessnock case. That was one that we got called to very early on in the piece. And it was 2 hives in the Cessnock area, which were highly infested with Varroa. And we were really interested to see that one because it was one of the first ones where we thought we could see parasitic mite syndrome. So 3 of the videos from Tocal went out and all looked at that, and they've all got overseas experience. And when we got back together and as a group and chatted about it, the consensus was that those hives would not survive. But nonetheless, they treated the hives with Baverol, they tightened them up, got rid of any spare room, made sure that there was no spare room. The bees were trying to keep warm, and they fed them sugar water, and those colonies survived. And in fact, this season, those have now both been split and the beekeeper has 4 colonies. So the lesson out of that one is, we seem in our conditions here without, and we think it's probably because we don't have deformed wing virus, colonies can seem to be highly affected with Varroa, but be brought back from the dead essentially. And we obviously don't want to get in that position, but it's just sort of like a good news story that we do have a little bit of fat there to play with if things sort of do get a little out of hand. The Sydney Metro case, that was one that I mentioned in the webinar a few months back, which was the case where there was alcohol washes done on 2 hives in an area where reinfestation had really ramped up, and they came back as both negative with alcohol washes, and 66 days later, one of those hives was dead and the other one had just a handful of bees and a queen all covered in Varroa. That was the case that we used to change the messaging in New South Wales that you should be checking your hives every month if you don't want to get caught out. The 3 weeks away case, that was a case where we had some commercial beekeepers who they have a break every year, and they'd unknowingly moved their hives into areas where reinfestation had really ramped up. They had done alcohol washes in mid-October, and they found no mites in any of their loads. So as far as they were aware, they had no mites at all, and were basically waiting to be, for their first detection. They then admittedly, and they're the first to admit it, they made the mistake of not continuing to do washes monthly. And then on the lead up to Christmas last year, they went around, all their hives were incredibly strong. They had produced lots of honey off them in that, spring and early summer period up here on the North Coast. And they went around, under-supered all their colonies, expected honey flows while they were away for 3 weeks. They came back, and on the 4th week, they went to move 1 load of 60 hives. And there was, I think the number was, there was about 7 or 8 still alive. All the rest were slimed out. They went to another load of 60. I think there's about 12 or 14 dead in that load. And they picked that load up and moved it, and they took it to another location to try and save it. And when I spoke to them 3 or 4 weeks ago, they were still pulling dead hives out of that load that were being slimed out, because the Varroa had such a negative impact on the bee health and the bee colony size that even with Baverol strips and small hive beetle treatments, they still couldn't keep the hives from being slimed out. And then the area where the reinfestation was really intense, where they'd moved those 2 loads of 60 from before Christmas, when they went to a load there of 120, there was 1 hive left, and it didn't have enough mites left in it to do bees left in it to do an alcohol wash. So they really got smashed, and that was about a little bit over a 3-month period from when they'd done their previous alcohol wash, found nothing, but had moved into a really high level area of really high reinfestation. The Hawkesbury case, that's a case which I only briefly mentioned. That was a person who had 65 colonies, had done a little bit of monitoring with sugar shakes, and really we have very limited information about what that person found, but hadn't done enough monitoring clearly, and very, very quickly went from 65 back to 6 colonies. Those colonies were treated with Baverol, and by the time we got to see them, they were actually doing quite well, but she had dropped from 65 to 6. The Hunter Valley drone trapping case, that's a positive case. That was a recreational beekeeper who was probably the reinfestation had probably started to just drop off during the period of this observation. But that beekeeper had treated with Baverol, got their mite loads right down, and then they did drone trapping. And with drone trapping, they were able to push out, I think it was around a little bit over 4 months before they had to do their next chemical treatment. And, it shows the effectiveness of drone trapping. It shows that there's some promise for drone trapping at the small scale when we get out the other side of the intense reinfestation. And that person was able to push out that treatment to, like I said, plus 4 months, where typically we're seeing in where we got high reinfestation areas, you'll treat, and then it's only a matter of weeks before you've got to treat again. The reinfestation's so high. And this last out of Sydney small commercial case, that's one that only came to us last week. 2 separate beekeepers. One of them had 50 hives, and they had 49 out of 50 found dead as a result of high Varroa load. And another beekeeper in that sort of similar area had 3 loads of 50, had already lost 2 loads by the time they contacted us. One of our videos went around last week, and the beekeeper was adamant that they didn't have Varroa mite, that it was poisoning. All these bees had been poisoned by spray. There was 1 hive left out of the 3rd lot of 50, so he lost 149 out of 150 colonies. And when they checked that last colony, our video was able to show him that he was absolutely loaded with Varroa mite. So I guess, you know, there's some good points and some good stories and bad stories here, and the intent is not to scare people, because lots of people are managing this successfully, but you know, we'll talk about later that they know what's going on in their hives, and that's the point. What we see in terms of the colonies that are lost is lots of people claiming poisonings, which are not. The EPA's been involved in a lot of the ones that we've gone to, and they're not poisonings. It's just hive mite loads. We see slime outs. And, you know, at the end of the day, the beetle's just waiting there. It's opportunistic, and it's going to come in and finish the job. Yeah, so it's, you know, like, we don't just see one thing, I guess the point is, and it's really easy, like if you see a slime out, to say I got slimed out, but the underlying cause may very well be Varroa. The other thing too is we've seen lots of cases with different timeframes, so I don't want people to go away and think, oh God, you know, I'll go away for 3 weeks, my hives are going to be dead, or 66 days. We've seen other cases which are longer, and we highlight the ones that, you know, are significant just to try and show how bad it could be, but at the same time to encourage people to check and know what's going on in your hives so that you don't end up in that position. One of the interesting things that has happened in New South Wales is that beekeepers even beekeepers that have not communicated, have really started to work together to you know, tried to come together and understand that this Varroa mite is a common enemy against all beekeepers. So, you know, while we might have disagreements with beekeepers down the road, or my dad didn't like your dad, or whatever the story was, people have started to put that behind them and say we need to work together to make sure that we get on top of this thing. Beekeepers that have had losses have reported us that they feel like they're really bad beekeepers, and we say to them, look, that's not the case. There is going to be losses during this process while people learn how to manage Varroa in Australia's conditions. And that's just part of it. But the important thing is to share your mistakes with as many people as possible. Share them with your state's VDOs so they can be the vector of that information to other beekeepers that you may very well not interact with. And even going forward from here, you know, we've got groups, and I've seen it up here on the North Coast where I live, where groups of beekeepers are using their APRIS Association meetings, or they're getting together as private groups, and they're talking about coordinating treatments so that there's less reinfestation amongst themselves as they go forward. This is the last slide, and this is the one that I think is the message we really need to get home to people, is that many beekeepers in New South Wales are managing Varroa very successfully. And they've all got, you know, they've all got things in common that they're doing to be able to achieve that. The first one is that they've got themselves ahead of the game. They've gathered knowledge from multiple sources. They've been to workshops. They've interacted with the VDOs. They've spoken to other beekeepers. Beekeepers have been overseas and seen what happens overseas. They look at YouTube online, and then, you know, obviously you've got to be careful with YouTube, because you got to be careful of the information that you're given, and you've got to try and consider it in the context of the Australian conditions. But the point is, they've gathered a lot of knowledge, and they know what they are likely going to see, and have an idea about how they're going to manage that. They're using a mix of synthetics and non-synthetics, and we're actually hearing not a lot of cases of people that are using treatments back to back, which is really encouraging. Because if we use the synthetics back to back and we lose them, and we get, when I say lose them, we get Varroa mite resistant to the synthetics, we're going to be in a much greater world of hurt than what we're currently in. The treatment box is one I've already mentioned. Some of them are looking at where Varroa, the wave is moving, the reinfestation wave. So the big beekeepers that have got access to a lot of country, I know cases where they've tried to stay ahead of that natural spread and beekeeper movement spread, and then they're looking to say, right now, where has it been for quite a while where the reinfestation's dropping off? Can I move my bees back behind the wave as a way to reduce the amount of treatments I have to do in a year and to reduce costs. They're looking at when they've got potential brood breaks, and they're considering flash treatments during those brood breaks. So obviously the oxalic acid's approved for vapor and dribble, and not really proving to be effective with lots of brood, but when you get a brood break or low amount of brood in your hive, they are quite effective. So they're looking for, when am I going to get these brood breaks? Am I splitting? Am I requeening? And there is some issues around that too. You've got to be careful that you don't muck around with queens. If you're requeening with cells, you've got to make sure they're definitely laying before you do the oxalic treatments, and don't disturb their mating flights. But they're looking at those things and considering them in addition to, the synthetic strip-based treatments. The second last point is, I've put stars next to that, is really, really important. They all have a regular monitoring schedule. I know one beekeeper down south from me here is running 4,500 hives, and they never miss monitoring those loads for Varroa mite every month to make sure they know what's going on. And to date, that operation has 2,600 hives with Varroa mite that they're managing, and so far, up until the week before last, they hadn't lost any, but they've now lost 6 hives. But 6 out of 4,500 hives, or 2,600 with mites, just goes to show that it can be managed. And the last thing is, they're looking at cost control strategies and diversification. Some of them are looking to go more into pollination and less into honey production. They're looking at the treatments they're using and what the cost of those treatments are, and what alternatives there are, and whether they can bulk purchase. I mentioned they're staying ahead of the wave, and they're moving back behind the reinfestation wave. Some of them accumulated a lot of equipment over the 20 years, and they're saying, do we need all this gear, just to get us through this more expensive hurdle that we've got to get over? Can we offload some of that gear at the moment just to give us a bit of cash flow? So anyway, that's the end of my presentation. We'll open to questions, but I guess the point I want to make is, don't be frightened by any of this stuff. Just use it as knowledge so that you can be prepared for what could very well happen in your area, and understand that many, many beekeepers in New South Wales are still in business and still managing it very, very successfully. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Dave. That was fantastic. I think we've had 42 people online while we were watching that, and we've had a number of questions come in, which I think Tino's going to bring onto the stage. Way you go, Tino.
Okay, great. Let's start with this one here. When Varroa arrives in an area, does the beekeeper need to adopt a more frequent inspection schedule? You talked about monthly mite tests, but are beekeepers finding that they almost have to go in weekly to monitor what's happening?
Not weekly. We have actually started to say 3 to 4 weekly now, because we have seen some cases like that case where the bees look great, and then they went on a 3-week break and they came back and the hives were lost. So I think their recommendation is still monthly. If you were going to go out and do something in your bees at the 3-week point, you'd probably have a check then as well, but not weekly. We're not seeing cases where you have to check weekly, no.
Okay.
And I just should say, Tino, variable as well, because so many factors affect the level of reinfestation that you're going to get, number of feral colonies, health of the bees that are in the area, all sorts of things. So I think if you stick with monthly, you should be, okay in most cases.
Okay. We got a few questions about sort of the treatment schedule or the treatment plan. So when a beekeeper first detects Varroa in the apiary, is there a typical first chemical that is a go-to chemical, or is it assessed on a case-by-case basis? And what does the pattern of treatment look like? So
there's no set pattern of treatment yet. There is, if you look at information overseas, they'll say, okay, we'll typically treat with Baverol at this point, and then we'll go with an oxalic acid, whatever they do. But at the moment here, it really is a case of, you could put a plan together, but the plan's probably going to be thrown out the window during the reinfestation phase, because it really is a situation that you just need to check and react with whatever treatment you think you need to do. And that's one of the things we encourage people when they're making those decisions, to talk to the VDOs and have a chat about that. So you've got to consider things like, right, if I use Baverol now, and then I have a really big honey flow 3 months down the track and I need something like a Varroa again, should I be considering something else now so I keep Varroa up my back pocket? But we just can't. There's no one plan fits all. It's really a case of sitting there and thinking, what treatments have I got available to me? What's my brood like? Am I going to get a brood break? What's the reinfestation level like? When are my honey flows? And then try and, work out what's going to work for you. But even with a plan in place, and beekeepers have said this to me, we'll have a plan, but that will change during the reinfestation phase because it is just so variable. And I'm sorry, because we'd love to give everybody the answer, but honestly, there's no one size fits all answer to that.
Right. There's a question about the reinfestation phase. Are there metrics or predictions about how long that phase lasts? Maybe before you answer that question, for those that might not be familiar with the concept, can you talk a little bit about what reinfestation is? And how it happens, because it's a really important term and not everyone necessarily understands it.
Yeah. So there's two phases when Varroa arrives in an area. The first phase is the build-up phase, which means you get the initial infestation in an area, and then everything starts to build up. All the colonies build up with Varroa mite. And during that phase, colonies that get such high numbers that they start to fail and die out, managed bees whose Varroa mite numbers have been kept low, those bees will then start robbing those colonies and bring back lots of mites to their colonies. And it's really variable, and it can be high levels of reinfestation of mites. So that's what the reinfestation, it's reinfestation during the build-up phase. I call it the reinfestation phase, but really it is reinfestation during the build-up phase. Once all the unmanaged colonies and the feral colonies die out, then you end up in what is an established phase where everything's more stable and predictable. But the only caveat we say to that is that we can go and say, well, okay, almost all the feral colonies are going to be dead in this area, so now I'll go back to that area and it should be much more stable. But any swarms that we throw out every year when we can't keep them in our boxes, they will establish as a feral colony, which then will invariably reinfest our hives in that area the next season. So my gut feel is we'll see this initial big hump, but then we'll probably see little humps going out into the future as we re-establish feral colonies because we can't, completely prevent swarming. Now, in terms of how long that's going to last, very early on in the piece, one of our New South Wales videos from America, Emily Nordyke, contacted a commercial beekeeper in Florida and said, well, you've got similar climatic conditions. How long did the reinfestation phase last? And he said 5 to 6 years. And we were looking at the numbers of the intense level of reinfestation in New South Wales and the effect it was having on the bees. And we were thinking, my God, if this thing lasts 5 or 6 years, we're in, it's going to be a world of hurt. Excuse me. But with our conditions here, where we get really good conditions for our bees, lots and lots of honey flows, lots of good nutrition, brood a lot all year round. Up here in New South Wales, many parts of New South Wales, we carry drone brood all year round. We have really, really good breeding conditions for Varroa mite. And what we're finding is that we think that the Varroa mite builds up so quickly that the colonies, if we had to put a number on it, we'd probably say as a group of EDOs that maybe they're lasting a year, a bit over a year, and then they're done. So we're hoping, and this is the first season, obviously, so we don't know, but we're hoping that reinfestation period really only goes for that one season or a bit more, and then it starts to settle down and you just see the little blips going forward.
That's great. That's great. We have a question about, you've mentioned several times the issue of slime out. And maybe just the question is, what does a slime out look like and how can we recognize it? But maybe talk a little bit about the connection between how does the slime out happen and the connection with Varroa, because Varroa is not causing the slime out. It's sort of a symptom. Yeah.
So a slime out is a result of the larvae of small hive beetle burrowing through all the combs, and as it goes through the combs, it defecates. That causes the honey to ferment, and the honey ferments and oozes out of the frames, and you end up with this filthy, disgusting, smelly, slimed out mess in your hive, basically. the bees will take off. And what you usually find with a slime out is that you just see all this oozing honey coming out of the frames. There's all browny, yellowy looking gunk over the inside of the boxes. Everything feels yucky and tacky, and it's just horrible. And you'll see thousands and thousands of these larvae burrowing through the combs. In really bad cases, they'll be all over the bottom board, just, totally unsurvivable for bees. Now, small hive beetle, the bees can't kill them, and small hive beetle fly in your hive, and the bees corral them up and sort of keep them under control as long as your colony strength, your bee colony strength, is high. Up here where we've got high humidity and warmer conditions, the beetle just absolutely love this area. And we're very much in a situation where if anytime we get a colony that drops in bee numbers and the small hive beetle numbers are high in the colony, you will get a slime out. So what we're finding is that we've got lots and lots of reports of slime outs this year. We think that's a double whammy. We think it's firstly the Varroa mite having an impact on the colony health and reducing the bee numbers, which is allowing the beetles to take over and results in a slime out. But secondly, areas where the reinfestation is really, really high and been established for a while, beekeepers in those areas are saying it's one of the worst beetle seasons they've had. Whereas up here on the north coast where I am, where the reinfestation is only just starting, well, I've only had a detection in my hives in the last 3 to 4 weeks. So we're not even in the reinfestation period yet. And yeah, there's beetle around, but it's not what I'd call a crazy small hive beetle season. We wonder if the small hive beetle we're seeing further down the coast is also the result of the beetles breeding up in the feral colonies that have failed and then resulting in lots and lots of beetle in the area as well.
That's fascinating.
Mm.
Now we have a question about sort of the Varroa effect on the beekeeping community. You've mentioned commercials on the front foot are still in business. How are recreational faring? Are you seeing any mass exits from beekeeping?
So I think if you look at overseas data, you definitely will get a lot of people drop out of beekeeping. Where every time we get a case where someone's thinking about it, we say, look, just give it a go. Certainly in the Sydney area, we're getting anecdotal reports from our VDOs that they're calling up people for engagements and they're saying, I haven't got bees anymore, I've lost them. So there are lots of reports of wrecks that have lost them. But there's also plenty of wreck beekeepers who have worked with us who are still in the game and they're still doing it quite well. So it's a mix. It comes down to how much time and how much effort you've got to put into the bees to make sure you can keep ahead of it. And look, the reality is some people will do really well. Some people will decide to get out forever. Some people have said, look, maybe this reinfestation phase is just really too much for us. Maybe I'll get out. And then when things settle down, I'll get back in then. It's a real mix. But certainly, yeah, definitely people are getting out. People are losing colonies. But there's also a lot of people that are, they've got ahead of the game and they're doing well at the rec level. Great. I mean, we go to the rec clubs and they're still very strong. So that to me says the people that really want to get with it and get on top of it are still doing really, really well.
In the areas where you've had the really strong reinfestations and the collapse of the feral colonies, are you hearing any anecdotal evidence or even hard data on the impacts on pollination? Just the fruit trees aren't producing enough fruit just because they're the loss of the feral colonies. Is that evident yet?
Yeah, so we've heard, and again, this is all anecdotal, no studies, but we've heard cases in the Hunter Valley of pumpkin growers who are getting not very many pumpkins. We've heard, we got contacted by local land services in New South Wales. This was, many months ago, where they were speaking to orchardists in the Greater Sydney area who were just getting really, really poor fruit set. So that will definitely happen. There is so many crops that have been reliant on pollination and benefited from the free pollination from feral colonies, where that's largely not going to be there anymore.
Great. Well, thank you very much to the audience who's presented some great questions. I'm going to turn it back to Andrew, who's...
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dave. That was fantastic. There were a lot of questions there, and I think we could have probably gone on all night if we'd allowed it to, but we need to keep moving on. But that was really excellent. Now, I wanted to say that an additional objective for the HiveMeet program is to enhance the communications between the VAA and its members and also other Victorian beekeepers. And so the plan is to have a regular segment that allows us to talk to members of the VAA board and to its subcommittees in order that they can discuss what's going on and keep everybody updated. So because the recreational conference is about to happen in 2 weeks' time, I've invited Angelique Drew, who's on the recreational subcommittee, to come along and talk to us about the rec conference that's coming up. So I'll bring Angelique onto the stage, I hope, and remove myself.
Thank you, Andrew, for that warm introduction. Coming up, as Andrew mentioned, is the VAA Educational Subcommittee. They present the Recreational Beekeeping Conference. That is at the Hume Global Learning Centre in Sunbury. It's on the 29th of March. Our theme this year is Beekeeping Basics to Biosecurity, and it guarantees something for everyone from the novice to the expert. Andrew, if I can get you just to move the slides forward, please. Our conference starts with Dr. Emily Remnant, and she expertly informs us and delves into the intricate world of honeybee viruses. Then we have PhD candidate Olivia Ducommun-Ditveron. She's from La Trobe University, a member of Professor Travis Beddoes' team, and she'll share her research on protection against bacterial threats and including the advances in diagnostics and vaccines. Varroa, it's in New South Wales, Victoria, and in recent days been detected as expected on the borders of New South Wales borders and Queensland. We have Elizabeth Frost. She's the technical specialist honeybees at the New South Wales DPI. Elizabeth also co-manages the Australia's Honey National Bee Genetic Improvement Program, and she'll provide us an update on everything Varroa. Next is Mike Atherton. He is from Varroa Controller Australia, and he will showcase chemical-free Varroa treatment using heat technology. After lunch, attendees have the option. They can attend the Honey Symposium or Beekeeping Best Practice with the VAA Education Subcommittee. The Honey Bee Symposium begins with Dr. Elizabeth Barber, and she brings her expertise exploring the complex and fascinating chemistry of honey. Up next, we learn the techniques of producing comb honey with Mike Love. Mike Love is a sideline beekeeper. He's been a beekeeper for nearly 40 years and 30 of those years as a member of the Melbourne Section Committee. He's renowned for his expertise in comb honey, and he's achieved exceptional success in competitions and widespread industry recognition. Then Peter Adams, a multi-award winning honey producer, will share his secrets to creating award-winning honey, and I'll cover food safety and compliance. If honey is not your thing, you have the opportunity to attend the session on beekeeping best practice. Andrew will kick off this session. Andrew's a master beekeeper, and he's the chair of the VAA Education Subcommittee. Andrew will guide you through successful requeening. We have Stephen Davey from the Geelong Beekeeping Club, who will provide you with guidance on how to prepare your hives for winter. Tony Willsmore. Tony Willsmore is one of our state VDOs. He's also a Wing Bee ambassador and a founding member of the Moonee Ponds Beekeeping Club. Tony is the proprietor of Suburban Bees and a beekeeping entrepreneur with many years of corporate experience in the healthcare sector. And he explores opportunities to maximise profit through bee-related production. VAA Secretary Tino Corsetti, he demystifies the science associated with swarming. Tino is a leading figure from the Woodend Bee Friendly Society. Following on, we come together again, and it's all about marketing our honey. We're fortunate to have Jessica Loccanini. She's Australia's own honey sommelier. She also comes with an extensive background in senior management in the corporate section as a marketing manager. So she'll combine her expert knowledge in honey appreciation with her marketing skills to teach us the knowledge, tools and language associated with marketing our honey to maximise profit. There's more on offer. We have videos available for questions and answers. We have officers from AgVic, and they'll have a myriad of take-home resources on offer. We have 7 suppliers from across Victoria showcasing their wares, and the conference concludes with Andrew Wooden, VAA Vice President, providing an update and an outline of some terrific projects that are underway. So if you haven't registered, I encourage you to either scan the QR code or hop online. If you go to the VAA homepage and then go to the events page, you can register there. Feedback from last year, it was very positive, and it's something that I encourage you to attend. So to conclude this update, we have the conference on Saturday, the 29th of March at the Global Learning Centre, and on Sunday, the 30th, there's an opportunity to undertake Varroa Management Training Workshop through the National Varroa Management Program. And that's being delivered for recreational beekeepers. If you haven't attended training, we encourage you to attend that training. So you can register online at varroa.org.au. That's it for the update. Thank you.
And thank you, Angelique, for that. That was great. We're just finishing up now, so I'd like to just bring in this information about next week. Next month, 3rd of April is the next meeting. That will be Bianca Giggins, who is ARBIC's National Coordinator. And she's going to be talking about giving us insights into where the VDOs have been operating and what they've been able to achieve. And we'll get guidance in how best to utilise these very important resources when they're available. So register for that. I'll post the links again after this meeting, and we hope to see you all again in 3 weeks' time. So thanks everybody for participating in HiveMeet. It's been really great to have you along, and thanks especially to Dave Fairhall for his excellent insights and presentation. Now, it could well be a bit of a cliche, but we're all of us on a journey, and that journey is learning to live with Varroa. And the main goal that we're setting up with HiveMeet and these programs is to support Victoria's beekeepers in learning how to live with Varroa. And we're trying to provide a platform for us all to build experience together and act in a communal way so that we can start to learn to live with Varroa and get comfortable with it. The rest of the world's been able to do that, and I'm sure we will too. We'll make lots of mistakes along the way, but we hope that the HiveMeet program will be a significant plank in the platform to getting us to deal with it. So thanks very much for attending. It's been great to have you along, and see you on the 3rd of April. Good night.